At the top of the news that we need to talk about, China. Again, the country constitutes 1.4 billion people. It's not about this economic shift, and also it's about this political and economic ambition under the current administration. Now, make no mistake, and recently, a lot of international diplomats or international business leaders, investors, flooded to the capital city of China for a very important international forum. Now, one of the particular leaders stood out, who is German Volkswagen CEO Oliver Blume, and he shared a lot of insights regarding China. For example, the comments such as, and I quote, China's rise didn't happen suddenly. It's 30 years of deliberate planning. What looks sudden, it's actually decades of execution. And he went on to say that China didn't just import products, it absorbed knowledge. They understood the technology and then built their own industry. The student has become the competitor, end quote. It came as a surprise that we listen to such rhetoric, not from the politicians, but from the international business leader or investors. What does this say about China? And also, based on the latest announcement from the sitting US President Donald Trump that he's scheduled to visit China instead of using the end of March, but the trip will take place in mid-May if everything goes well in the States, especially the war between US and Iran at this moment. How do we understand that? You see, the point is today, when we talk about China, we can crown this nation with many labels, but we need to look at the core of the country. And what about the younger generation? And what about this economic drive among the people in China? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite back our distinguished speaker, who is Dr. Michael Patrick. Again, Michael just came back from a wonderful, shall we say, impressive tour international, and I'm sure he has a lot more to say about what's happening between US and Iran, and also the comments on China. Well, Michael, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you, Will. It's good to be here. I hope you are doing well. And it's going in some interesting times that we're living in, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, Michael, again, as I mentioned in the intro, lately, a lot of international diplomats and leaders, and especially business investors, they made their way to China. As I mentioned at the beginning, the German CEO of a company, Volkswagen, made the comments about China, especially about the sentence that stood out to me. It's the student has become the competitor, and technology in China, it's advancing at an incredible pace. Entire industries are merging almost overnight. There's a lot we can learn: structure, discipline, and execution. Michael, from your perspective, I love to ask that question to you because I know that you teach leadership and you study leadership. And also we talk about the relationship between US and China many times. So how do you think, or what is your assessment that listen to a European business leader and share the comments about China? Is that a message, or what we say, a confirmation to China? Or perhaps it's a reminder for the US or even other any adversaries to China to say, listen, it's time to cool down. Let's think about what we can learn from the country instead of criticizing or air quote attack the country. Your thoughts?
You know, it's very interesting that what's happening in the Middle East, particularly right now, as we've discussed before, to use an Americanism, the big dog on the porch is China. It's not often talked about in the daily news, but China was the biggest oil consumer of Iranian oil. It gathers about 13% of its own oil from there, but it is a major player throughout that region. And so whatever sorts itself out regarding Iran and oil and gas and the Gulf states, China plays a significant role in that. It's simply not being discussed. All the attention seems to be on Donald Trump and the military. Of course, we understand why that's so. But China is the player. And when we see the United States and Donald Trump back off a meeting right away, part of that is wanting to not arrive, in Beijing with everything in chaos in the Middle East. He hopes to settle things down more in the U.S.'s favor before he sits down and listens to the concerns of China. Not that there isn't some back-channeled conversations now, but I think he's waiting for the full spotlight of the world on him in China when he gets things a little bit more sorted out than they are right now. I think, that everyone around Donald Trump would admit that they bit off a little more than they could chew as quickly as they may have intended. So this is going to take some time. There's for all kinds of reasons. And now you have the Houthis and others getting involved. So I really think he's looking at timing as to why he's pushed back this meeting with China, because China is not incidental to this. China will have a significant role in whatever is sorted out.
Well, Michael, let's talk about what is happening. Again, you mentioned between the war between Iran and U.S. at this moment. Now, another piece of reality that we are paying closer attention, or as a matter of fact, we're seeing every day, is this internal crack or the internal division within the Trump base. I mean, we are listening to a few loud and straightforward media talents or personalities that criticize what the Trump administration is doing in Iran. But on the other hand, there are still supporters. There are still advocates regarding the war between U.S. and Iran. And when I say advocates, I don't mean just the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. We are talking about within the Trump base, people are actually divided heavily about the war. So, Michael, you, again, as I mentioned before, you teach leadership and you've been in the field of international journalism for decades. From your perspective, why do you think that today there is a huge division within the Trump base when it comes to the war with Iran? And also, how do you think that this could either benefit or detrimental to the Trump administration, or perhaps this midterm election, or even I dare to imagine the path to 2028? What do you think of that?
Well, you can imagine that Donald Trump is hoping he can wrap these things up in a timely manner. But we do see some significant things happening within his own base in the States. Both he and the vice president and about 7 or 8 other leaders in the quote MAGA movement of sorts have decided not to attend a major conference that goes on every year involving conservatives and called CPAC. They signaled they're not coming. They're not going to CPAC because there they would have to speak with the MAGA base, and everything they said would be paid attention to by the base. Right now, his popularity is down around 39%. That's not really surprising given he started a war, which many people in the conservative movement was a bit surprised by this particular move. And so it's a situation where, and he's not doing well in Congress among Republicans. The House Armed Services Committee this week was getting a Pentagon briefing, and some strong supporters of Trump were pretty rattled by what they didn't hear. They were not getting complete answers, according to the chair, the Republican chair of the House Services Committee. A key House member walked out of the meeting and said that they had been misled. So he's got some significant challenges with his base. It's not simply the Republicans and their King's rally and their attack on Trump that's got his attention. He's got trouble in the home camp. And so coming to some kind of a resolution with Iran is got to be a top priority. He is as I've said before, a bit of a go it alone president, inexplicably insulting allies, creating extra chaos for himself for no apparent reason that anybody can quite figure out. So he's got problems at home as well as in the Middle East right now.
Michael, let's keep our conversation going. Again, as I mentioned before, the war between US and Iran at this moment, as you and I were speaking, in a perfect world, that both sides can actually figure out a tangible and a practical way for negotiation. But again, we have to pay attention to the noises outside the two states or outside the two countries. Again, you mentioned the countries in the Middle East, but meanwhile, let's talk about some of the countries on the European side. The Spanish president that claimed that it would not offer US as a base for whatever the reason. And also the British Prime Minister also came out and declared that Great Britain will never be involved in a regime change. Last but not least, as I mentioned before, Germany, has not been very positive about the results and also the effort. To Donald Trump, again, Michael, you know this better than I do. Trump is not a fan of betrayal. Trump will basically remember that the people that betrayed him during the critical times and also would love to pay them back whenever the U.S. needed. So from your perspective, how would you assess the attitude from those European countries? So in other words, is Trump betting too much on the allies? Or perhaps it's actually a good opportunity for Trump and also for the people around Trump to understand when it comes to international war, when it comes to war without reasons or without solid, logical reasons, U.S. might be just alone on this. What do you think of that?
I think that when you go to take a major action, like something that is going to have a global impact, not just a war with Iran, but oil and gas issues that will affect virtually everybody, you really want to be rallying your allies. And Trump was surprised when, after all of the things he's done, that good and bad, that they're not necessarily rushing to his aid. I mean, what did he say about the British this past week? He called their aircraft carrier a toy boats or toy aircraft. He's insulted virtually everybody out there that he can insult, and then wonders why they're not rallying to his support. He's pulled back some of his support for Ukraine, which is a critical issue in Europe right now. The Germans' army is in Lithuania, where I'm at, rehearsing for the potential for a Russian invasion of Lithuania within the next 3 years. They take the war going on in Ukraine very seriously, and yet he seems to be backing off of his involvement there. So all of these things the chickens come home to roost a bit, and you can't expect to insult allies 1 minute and then the next minute expect them to rally to your support when you started a war that you haven't even really completely explained to your own people. And that's not saying that Donald Trump doesn't have a particularly sound reason for doing what he's doing. I'm simply saying that you need to be someone who builds coalitions, who builds support. And we've had presidents that were pretty good at that, at being able to rally support from others. Donald Trump is much more of a lone person out there, taking on these challenges, but largely doing it alone. Now, Israel, of course, is involved in what's happening in Iran, but they were always going to be involved with whatever goes on with Iran. That's their nemesis, their chief nemesis. I'm talking about building the levels of support that he needs to make progress there. I think the real question now is what role the Gulf states may play in the next steps that he takes. And now that you have the Houthis tying up the Red Sea port area, that becomes another issue that complicates this board, this chessboard. This isn't a quick game of checkers. This is chess, and now it's really incumbent on Donald Trump to rebuild a coalition of support on a united front.
Well, Michael, let's move our conversation to some of the domestic concerns. Believe it or not, I am looking at an article which came out about, let's say, almost 2 or 3 weeks ago. The reason why I brought this into our conversation is because it looks like this topic is going to be critical or important in a while, but actually it's happening right now. The article, which is entitled, "Should AOC Run for President in 2028?" I mean, Michael, believe it or not, when I saw this article, the news headline, in addition to the reaction of passing out for about 5 minutes, and then I quickly realized this is the reality that we're living in right now. It's people are talking about the hope and the path for the Democrats in 2028. And again, not only that we're seeing a couple front runners, we talk about Gavin Newsom, and also we talk about Wes Moore, and also we're looking at Cory Booker, some of the names that actually really made themselves out there a couple years ago. But for the first time, literally for the first time, someone actually suggested that AOC should run for president in 2028, not only because of her humble beginning and also her political path, her political journey, most importantly, that she's being supported by Bernie Sanders, and also the current mayor, Mamdani of New York. And so, again, a lot of voters actually had sympathy or even understanding connection with a person like that. So, Michael, from your perspective, are we living in a fantasy world today that we think about someone like AOC can actually run for 2028? I mean, believe me, don't get me wrong. I believe in the states, in the state of democracy, everyone has the given rights to run for president anytime they want. But for someone like AOC, isn't that a little bit too unprepared or too immature to think about the presidency for 2028? What do you think is the strategy or even the complication of the Democrats right now?
Well, that's the point. I don't think the Democrats have a strategy other than to be on the attack of all Donald Trump's missteps, or what they see as missteps as they deal with the American public. What was promised? Has he delivered on it? The big question is, are we better off? We'll be in 2028. I can tell you right now, the question will be, are we better off today than we were before Trump took office? There were reasons why Trump went to office, and it wasn't all in his promises. Some of it was because he was the better alternative for a lot of voters. The question is what's the picture going to be like involving Donald Trump as it moves past the midterms elections? What kind of footing does he have coming into the midterms? I think this is going to be a real critical decision as to what the Democrats do. They really have to move beyond the Bernie Sanders and mayor of New York kind of issues. They have to look at how are we going to embrace America in a working class way? How are we going to reach out to people that aren't, anti-Trump from the word go? How are we going to reach people that are really looking for an alternative if Trump continues to deteriorate? I think he has a lot on the line with this war that has been started and inflamed, and all of the price of oil and gas and everything else being affected. He's got to handle this. It was what we talked about last time. He's got to secure those two straits so that shipping can resume. He's got a lot of things he's got to be able to line up. That's going to decide probably the midterm, and how the midterm goes is going to give you a sense of what the Democrats have to do. But they honestly need a strategy that reaches beyond the very narrow base they actually had in the last election. They've got to bring out some new faces and be willing to work towards the middle and less to the extremes.
Well, Michael, again, right now it's fascinating to try to figure out what the strategies, again, as you mentioned before, if there is any strategy or there were any solutions can help the Democrats to regain the trust and the reliability among the voters. But on the other hand, I have to be honest with you, it's being a podcaster or being a journalist, it's really hard to understand the messages from the Republican side as well. I mean, again, because we're still seeing the hot issues such as the immigration policy reform, and also the debate on Big Beautiful Bill, this healthcare, Medicaid, Medicare for all. Again, those issues are not going to be taken care of regardless who's going to be in the White House, in 2028. But the next question, Michael, again, I want to dive into a little bit deeper is, how do you think that what's happening domestically in America, it's portraying the picture of America to China? Because we know that China has, I want to use the word patiently. China has patiently waits for US. Again, either it's a war or it's a conflict, it's a compromise, or perhaps it's a negotiation, whatever that comes. But no one expects a US to be more chaotic than ever. So how do you think that China today, it's seeing that this political division domestically and internationally, we're seeing UF involve itself in the war, with Iran, and also the ongoing war in Ukraine, and also President Trump's interest in taking over Cuba. Michael, Cuba. I mean, what? So, you are more experienced than I am as a journalist, as a scholar. But again, China must scratch its head to say, Trump, what's next? You already postponed your trip all the way to May. What if, God forbid, something happens between US and Cuba? Are we going to see the trip at the end of the December? Or perhaps 2027? Is there a endpoint for Trump's desire or hunger? Michael, what do you say to that?
Well, there's a former president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who said, when you're up to your keister and alligators, you forget that you started out to drain the swamp. And, in this case, I think Donald Trump had these ambitions of America first and a lot of promises that he made. And now he's up to his keister and alligators. And so things are going to be a little more challenging than perhaps he imagined at first. But these are doable issues. I think Cuba really is one of the issues that could be fixed with proper diplomacy and reopening aid and helping the Cuban people deal with what has been a dysfunctional government for a long time. And so this is an issue that doesn't require anywhere near the deft that sorting out Iran is going to take. But it's an issue that could actually benefit Donald Trump if he comes across a little less pugnacious regarding Cuba. But let's just put it where it is for the Democrats. They have to reach to the middle, and this is a good time for them to begin to show themselves as people who are capable of being, quote, in a sense, their own version of America First. Just simply having a lot of rallies where you pay people to go out and march, that's not really going to turn the voters around. They're going to have to come up with solid programs. Right now, they're standing in the way of getting legislations that it passed that will help, for example, the airport crisis. And they're hoping that the public will blame Trump for the airport crisis. Well, he's putting forward how he thinks he can get the money flowing again to solve the airports. But the public is looking for the Democrats to do more than take another 2 weeks off vacation and close Congress. They're going to have to pass some legislation that actually shows that they have a concern for the average working person in the United States. These are critical issues. This is how they govern more to the center and show that they can do something else than send a Trump critic into the circle.
Well, again, Michael, surely we're living in an unprecedented time. And when I say that, I don't just necessarily mean from this economic standpoint, but again, by talking to international leaders and also diplomats that in China, everyone is very, very anxious about the next move that Trump is going to take. It's not just about the war with Iran. It's also about the war in Ukraine. And hopefully that someone, again, to borrow a saying from a U.S. senator to say, when things are going too much or when things are too much, someone need to tell the president, you are wrong and you need to stop. Because I believe the summited advisors around President Trump are smart and wise, but it's one thing to fulfill the promises of President Trump, but also it's something else to think about this grand or global strategy for the bigger peace or for better future. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to speak to Dr. Michael Patrick. Again, Dr. Patrick is a scholar and international journalist. They travel extensively around the world, and he's very experienced in international affairs. And again, every time we talk to Michael, always bring fresh and also insightful analysis to all of us. So again, Michael, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. I would love to have you back on the show. And hopefully next time we talk, and we're going to see a better talk or better conversation between Trump and the Chinese leader. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Will. Your insights, especially on China, are really helpful to dialogue and for people to kind of understand what's next. And China is a significant player in ending the current crisis in a positive way for everybody involved.